Now let's transition into another area, the social brain. Many people are now taking a look at, well, what does it mean to have this capacity for social connectedness? What parts of the brain are operative? How do we form attachments with our early attachment figures, moms and dads and so on? What goes on between us and our caregivers that changes our brain and calms us down or maybe gets us more activated? We're going to talk about those parts of the brain because they are so important with regard to therapy. So these are the systems right now identified as part of the social brain. Remember the orbital frontal area. That area that got wiped out with Phineas Gage, who was that railroad worker in Vermont, who was this upstanding guy, you know, and he was a 27-year-old who everybody respected. He was supervising all these guys older and younger, and boom, he lost his orbital frontal through that big steel rod and lost the ability to form and maintain social relationships. And it's the orbital frontal cortex bilaterally that's so important in our connectiveness with our attachment figures. Same with the amygdala. Not only is it kind of like the fear button, but it's also the part of the brain that kind of sets an emotional stamp on experience, saying in effect, this is important, pay attention to it, positive and negative. But unfortunately with people with anxiety disorders, it gets overactivated and gets a little bit hyperactive relative to other parts of the brain. The insula is also a very interesting part of the brain that has been connected to the idea of empathy and also mindfulness meditation. So I mentioned earlier that some of these Tibetan monks that had been encouraged by the Dalai Lama to go sit in these functional MRI machines with Richard Davies and University of Wisconsin have larger insulas, proportional to how many years of meditative practice. Why is that important? It's this part of the brain that's kind of connects you with your body and a sense of who you are within your body. Think of it, you're sitting there meditating for thousands of hours. You're there with yourself, feeling yourself and the world around you. Makes sense that the insula would be thus enlarged. The cingulate gyrus, which is right above the corpus callosum, very involved in attentional capacities and also connectiveness with others and the feeling of rejection. Mirror neurons, amazing new discovery around sensing another person's pain, like Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, and so on. And then facial expression modules. And these are the neural chemicals related to connectedness. Oxytocin has recently been called the kind of cuddling neuron. In addition to childbirth, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that oxytocin has a lot to do with our ability to maintain and stimulate trust. There's a classic study, I think was done in Switzerland, where a person was asked to sell a product to another person. So he sat down, she sat down, and then somebody sprayed some aerosol oxytocin. And if that aerosol oxytocin was sprayed, she'd be more apt to buy the product. Well, you can stimulate the production of oxytocin just by cuddling your lover. And you feel more comforted because it really actually works to calm down the overactivity of the amygdala. Interesting. The cuddling neuron calms down the overactivity of the amygdala, calming down fear. Now, what's interesting about dopamine is dopamine's not only the pleasure neurotransmitter, but if fused with oxytocin, you know, in many ways, it can enhance an intimate relationship, because think of it in terms of early relationships. You know, everybody loves the first part of a relationship. It's just magical, and you can't wait to be with him or her. And you know, many ways your nucleus accumbens, that fear, not fear, rather the that pleasure area of the brain is really activated by dopamine. Just thinking about him or her activates the sense of pleasure and all that. Well, unfortunately, after a while, the other person, both realize, my God, you are human after all. You have some imperfections here, and that dopamine level sort of drops down a little bit. Hopefully some oxytocin kind of connectiveness happens, but if you can fuse the two later in the relationship by increasing novelty, because dopamine really is involved in novel experiences, as is norepinephrine, then the enhancement of the relationship can occur. More recently, the vagus nerve certainly has garnered some interest in last couple years, largely because of the work of Stephen Porges and how important it is to social relatedness. The vagus nerve basically innervates many organs in the body, and it's generally thought that the type of vagal tone that you have, weak vagal tone versus strong vagal tone, determines to some degree how anxious you are. People with better vagal tone can regulate their heartbeat better. People with weak vagal tone can't, are more anxious, and people with strong vagal tone are better able at connecting with other people. And can you enhance that? Are you just born with that? Yes, you can enhance it. These are some of the areas that I was talking about before: the cingulate cortex right above the corpus callosum, the orbital frontal, and the fusiform gyrus, which hangs down and is part of the temporal lobes, is really involved in facial recognition. Interesting. You know, we think of, you know, the temporal lobe as really kind of the area for language and sound and speaking, and, but also facial recognition, knowing that that's Lloyd. Oh yeah, I know that's Lloyd. I get that area knocked out and I've got some problems. I don't know who that guy is. This is the slide that Lloyd was mentioning that illustrates the complexity of the vagus nerve, how it innervates all these systems. These areas of the so-called social brain have been looked at by other researchers with respect to drug abuse. Well, geez, I wonder if some people, again, I don't mean to generalize and say all, but some people are in effect resolving or compensating for poor attachment relationships by activating some of these areas of their brain, such as the cingulate cortex and the orbital frontal areas. It's interesting that cocaine addicts have smaller cingulates, insulas, and prefrontal cortex. Interesting. Or this same reward system is involved in flirting. Hans Panskeep, who is one of the main contributors to this literature, has suggested.